back to the Wheel Talk podcast. My name is Abby Mickey, and I am here with friends to talk about women's professional road cycling and specifically the World Championships in Zurich happening right now. Matt and Neef, hello.
Hello, so good to be back, and wow, what a race we have to talk about today.
Yeah, seriously. Matilda Raynolds in the airport.
Back? Yes. G'day everyone. Yes, apologies, I'm in an airport. And so you might get a few updates of who's flying in, who's flying out, but very excited to both see you and unpack this race.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack. We have so much to talk about. It's actually a little bit overwhelming when you think about how much happened on Saturday, how many things went right for people, how many things went wrong. I think you could kind of sum it up by saying that everyone rode the wrong race and one person rode the right race and that person won the race. But we're going to dig into everything. Before we talk about the women's race, just a quick mention that Kat Ferguson doubled up on her world titles and won the road race after winning the women's junior time trial as well. So the Movistar rider, the newly signed Movistar rider, continues to make waves, and looking through her results this season, what an incredible talent she is. I can't wait to see what she can do for Movistar next year, and honestly how she can impact British cycling as well, because they're a little short on depth at the moment. And so yeah, just a really, really exciting rider, and she just keeps adding more and more results to that long list that she's growing at the moment.
As you said, looking back at her results this year, she's dominated in those Nations Cups races. She had that stage win at the Tour de la Samoa in Belgium just a few days before Worlds, and then winning these two races. And she raced really aggressively and really positively on Thursday, I think it was, with the junior women's road race. And yeah, huge talent, really exciting. She keeps getting better and better, and she's got 3 years with Movistar now to really grow. And definitely an exciting ride to watch for sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how well Movistar have done with their juniors, actually, or who they're picking up. They had two in the breakaway that have already signed with Movistar for that junior team. And yeah, you wouldn't expect it, particularly they're not the best development team on the men's side. But yeah, they've obviously done some really good scouting, and I think are looking really good for the years to come.
Yeah, definitely agree. And they're one of the teams that when they have incoming riders, a lot of the times they are U23, U19 even. And so it's a team of the future for sure, and a team to watch how they're able to harness those talents and how they're able to grow with those riders and hopefully develop those riders. So worth keeping an eye out for Kat Ferguson, but a lot of other juniors as well. And yeah, we'll talk about a little bit more about the junior race later on. The elite women's race on Saturday was, well, the weather was horrendous. I can say on the ground. I'm on the course, and we decided to go to the zoo on the morning of the women's race, and my daughter had very, very wet socks after about 3 minutes of being at the zoo, although the zoo was a hit. If you ever go to Zurich, I really recommend the zoo. It's super cool. But the race itself was just torrential rain and cold, and hearing from some of the riders on the ground, the course was even harder than we thought it was going to be. There was really no flat at all throughout the entire course. It was always up and down. There was surprise climbs left, right, and center. And I think we could really see that in the live coverage, but the riders in the race were saying that it was absolutely brutal. They were freezing. The course was hard. Everything was hard. It was a really, really challenging race. And we saw a lot of things happen. A lot of moves went with riders that I think we would have expected to stick a little bit better. Some really, really questionable tactics from the Dutch. And in the end, even though it looked like she definitely wasn't going to win on Saturday, Lotte Kopecky was able to claw her way back into the front of the race, win from a select group of riders. So she's holding on to the rainbow jersey for another year. And I think we all kind of saw it coming, but the way in which she won was very, very different from last year. So we have a lot to break down. And I honestly don't even know where to start except for the biggest talking point from the race that I could tell was the Dutch. You know, they came into this race as one of the strongest teams on the start list, which they almost always are. And we've seen really questionable tactics from them in the past, notably, you know, Tokyo road race, for example, at the Olympics. But it was like a whole nother level of what on earth are they thinking yesterday. From, you know, having them seemingly all working for Vollering to when it was pretty clear that there was no way Vollering was going to win the race, but they still shelled their best option in Marianne Vos. There was just so much that happened. And so I think we should start with the Dutch. I think people probably want us to try to explain, and we will not be able to, but we'll do our best.
I think there's two key moments that you need to look at when looking at the Dutch thing, and that is there was a group up the road from about 100 Ks to go to 74 Ks to go, and at that point the Dutch had two riders up the road. That was Rianne Marcus and Misha Bredewald who had come across. And then for some reason you see Paulina Royakkers on the front chasing down that group. So that was the first kind of moment, which was strange. And then the same thing later again when 30 Ks to go, when you had Voss and Marcus out front with two other riders. And then meanwhile on the back, you've got Bredewald chasing behind. So, you know, Dutch riders working on the front to try and extend the gap, and Dutch riders working behind to try and close down the gap. And it was all just a little bit confusing. And I do have a question for both of you about this whole thing, but I'm keen for your thoughts, Tills, before we get into that.
Oh, I just love this race for if you didn't actually see the footage and people were just giving you headlines, there's no way you could work out that Kopecky won. Like if you say there's two Dutch riders up the road, Voss is up the road with 90 seconds lead, there's 20 Ks to go, Kopecky's been dropped 2 to 3 times. There's just so many headlines there, and the way that the race was playing out for the Dutch not to win and for Kopecky to come back and win, I think that is what is so difficult. There's so many questions on how did this happen? How did 3 Dutch in the top 10 but not win? And so there's so many key moments there, and I think you come back to a little bit on, unfortunately, when you want it, just Demi looks so desperate. She rode desperately, and unfortunately that's not when you make good decisions. She's had to ride for herself a lot of this year, and sometimes also the best GC riders are not the smartest riders, and that's fact. Like they win races on their FTP, on their power to watts. They don't win it on tactics. And unfortunately, Demi just made terrible choices throughout. And there's some really key moments, I think, that we can break down.
I think regardless of how hard the course was, it wasn't a climber's course. So Demi was not going to win the race yesterday. Like, she had great legs and she's in good form, but it would have taken like her classic form that she had in 2022 for her to win this race, and she simply didn't have that. And so there was having the Dutch, you know, pick Demi as their leader, which whether or not that is the case, we don't know. But it did seem like that from the beginning, that Demi was probably leading the team. Picking Demi was maybe like the first mistake, because Demi's such a strong rider. She would have, if they had gone all in for Voss, they would have won this race. Like, Voss was on a fantastic day, and she looked great, and she was in some good moves. And the moment that really broke her was when Demi attacked in the final selection and just completely imploded Voss. At that point, they had 3 Dutch women in the group. They were the strongest team in the race at that point. And they could have gone on the defensive and ridden for Voss, and they would have won the race. But instead, they were racing against each other, and they handed the race to Kopecky on a silver platter, because when they're racing against each other, Kopecky was able to get back into that group and was able to win from that group. It was just like mind-boggling. Even though we know that the Dutch do this all the time, it was still mind-boggling to watch. It was like the SD Works riders versus the Visma Lisa bike riders. And it just made no sense whatsoever. And I'm sure like I would not want to be like anywhere near the Dutch team. Actually, I would love to hear what Voss is like pretty understated, so I don't think that she would like really lose it at the rest of the team or everyone but Rihanna Marcus really. But like I wish she would, because I feel like she has every right to do so. Like there was only one rider in that group that was with maybe like 10K to go that could have beat Kopecky in a sprint, and it was Voss. And Vollering got rid of her. It was just like such a just weird way to race a bike race. But we've seen Vollering do not know how to tactically read a race in the past. We saw it at Liège-Bastogne-Liège just earlier this year. So it's not entirely new, but you would think like at this point that maybe, things would have changed. But again, it's the Dutch. This is what they do.
So I feel like almost the easy thing to say is that the Dutch tactics was weird. And I'm definitely saying that. I definitely agree that was the case. And watching it looked completely bizarre, and the TV commentators couldn't explain what was going on. But I guess I wanted to put it to the two of you and to us as a group to try and like explain what were they trying to do. Like we can say, oh, they made mistakes, sort of, but they're all smart bike riders, they're all experienced bike riders. What do you think they were trying to do in those strange moments? What was the plan?
I mean, maybe because they're the strongest team on the start list, they were trying to like divide and conquer. Like, oh, we have such a strong team, we can split in two. And like we've seen them do at, lower level races like Europeans, they've done this before. Like SU Works has played around with kind of similar tactics of having just kind of splitting the team down the middle and racing against each other in a way. And it has maybe worked for them in the past. And so maybe they thought, oh, like we'll just, pick names out of a hat. I don't know, like who likes who better? You ride for them. I don't like, but it's, they also like, they could have been trying to play the numbers game and having multiple leaders and trying multiple ways to attack without having any communication within the team, which would have led to the scenario that we, finished the race out with.
The way it looked, there's definitely going to be a huge criticism on Demi Vollering. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of us are necessarily saying, and some of the criticism that's been heaped on her. I think, we've got to remember it was Liana Lippert that really brought back that breakaway and was attacking. But the issue was that Demi continued to make it worse as it went on. So she then went on to put in an effort which dropped Voss. And then she proceeded to not put herself in a winning position at any point from that point onwards, like from 10K to go or even more. She never put herself in a position that she looked like she could win that bike race. She was the one. Like when Elisa Longo Borghini attacked, and this is it, like ELB is going to take this world champs. Like Kopecky called her bluff. Kopecky didn't chase. Kopecky stayed there, and she made Demi chase with no other option for the Dutch to win that bike race. And I think that's where the challenge was with Demi. She just continued to make it worse throughout. So, I think she got herself into that mess, Matt, and then tried to unravel it, like tried to take control of the situation, not even thinking about who am I actually working for here. But what I do love is it was the first time all year that we've seen SD Works work really well together. She rode the perfect race for Lotte Kopecky. And if you didn't have any of the backstory, and I come back to these headlines, like if you didn't know how this year has played out, and you just thought, wow, what a great teammate. But honestly, that is how she rode that race. And as we said, Kopecky got dropped multiple times, but there's so many lessons in there for young riders who are watching, or aspiring riders, or just your average punter. Like just even Vollering being on the front and trying to get people come round. It's like, mate, one, no one's coming round you. And two, if you want them to come round, stop pedaling, pull off. I just think the tactics and smartness, except for her final attack of Ruby Rose McGannon, just paled in comparison to how Demi Vollering ran that race. And so, yeah, it's very hard to explain, Matt, but I think they made a mess, and she tried to unravel it, and unfortunately just made it worse.
Do you reckon she maybe backed herself in the sprint? We've seen her go head-to-head with Kopecky in the past, even when they're on the same team. You know, they're not that far apart in terms of sprinting ability. Like, you back Kopecky most of the time, but they have been close. Do you think there's a chance she thought, long, hard race, bad weather, feeling good, I'll back myself in the sprint here?
Was she?
I think if she was backing herself in a sprint, then she really underestimated Chloe Dygert, who we know has a very good sprint, and Ruby Roseman Gannon, who I think would have podiumed had she not attacked when she did, which we'll definitely talk about. We're gonna talk a ton about Ruby. I'm sure of it. But had those two, I think she underestimated both of those riders if she thought that she was going to beat Kopecky in a sprint. Like, if she thought that Kopecky was her only competition in a sprint.
Yeah, and sprints on those races aren't normal sprints. We've seen it on some of the best riders and even Voss, but I think Voss would have just been quite dejected by that stage, where she placed in the top 10. But in such a race of attrition, the top sprinters aren't necessarily the best. And like, Demi looked good. The way she was riding, she looked really good, and she'd seen that Kopecky had been dropped a few times, but yeah, that's just overconfident on that one. Surely not, particularly with how much she led from the front in those final few Ks.
Yeah, she did look good. And remember too that it was Demi that saw Kopecky get distance with that move, like 20 Ks to go. So like, Elisa Longo Borghini attacks with 20 Ks to go, Kopecky's distance, but it was only when Vollering came to the front that the gap really opened to Kopecky. And Kopecky said afterwards in her interview that, like, she admitted that when Demi was on the front, she was in a really bad place and really struggled to get across. And, she had some help getting back across, and particularly when the pace kind of eased off a little bit. But yeah, Vollering was looking good. And yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to look for explanations, and maybe there just aren't any, but I'd be curious to get the full story from Vollering, which we're not going to get. But I mean, I feel like I say that every time. I'd like to hear more from Demi about what actually went on.
No, I feel like yeah, there's like a healthy amount of blame that can be put on Demi for the Dutch not winning the race, but I also think that there are other riders in the peloton who, or in the Dutch team who are just as blameworthy. Like, having a break up the road with 4 riders, and 2 of them are Dutch, and 1 of them is Marianne Vos, and even touching the front, not to disrupt any chase, is like egregious. Like, they were in the perfect position to win the race when they had that group of 4 up the road with Rihanna Marcus, Vos, Ruby Roseman Gannon, and Justine Gerke. Like, they were in such a good position. And why would Bredewald even touch the front of the race at that point? That makes no sense to me whatsoever, unless she was like getting on the front to like slow that group down and make sure, like, to get in the middle of a chase, like make sure that they were kind of disrupting it, but that's not what they were doing. She was full blown chasing that back. And that to me is almost more of a red flag, which like wouldn't be Bredewald's call. She's very much a domestique working in service of others at this point. So you like, again, I think like a lot of the blame can be put on the management of the team and the plan going into the race and what the riders were told by the director of the team in the first place. And we know that the woman directing the race for the Dutch on Saturday is the same person who directed the team for the Tokyo road race. So like, obviously there's a problem higher up, and it's not just the riders, because yeah, the riders are just doing the best that they can with what they're told and what they are doing. And obviously they make decisions for themselves. They're not robots. And I think Demi's decisions in the latter stages of the race are all her. But there were other moments that it's like the Dutch as a whole that like you would hope that they would look at this race yesterday and be like, oh man, we really need to change some things. Unfortunately, this is kind of just how they operate. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but I have it on good authority that actually she's stepped down as the DS for the Dutch national team. They're currently looking for a new DS. So maybe that means in a year's time in Rwanda, we're going to get a completely different Dutch team that is like unified behind one rider. But yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah, and looking at Rwanda, have you seen the climbing that they're saying that's going to be in that next World
That's going to
Champs?
be the
So
hardest world championships ever.
yeah, definitely going to get her opportunity again, where Voss, potentially not. And so was definitely, as you opened with that, Abby, like, definitely it started, this whole thing unraveled way from like before kilometer zero. I think for the Dutch, but yeah, I just love that. I rewatched the highlights and Kopeck's name wasn't mentioned to really till the finish. So, and that's what you want.
I think you're right, Tills, that Kopecky really used her energy well. There was a quote from her interview straight after the race about how she really tried to ride her own pace back, and yeah, she just used her energy very well in the right moments, and just played a really good game towards the end. And she also had really good support there from Justine Hakira, who was in, I think, at least 2 of the big breakaways on the day, looked strong, and just took a lot of the pressure off Kopecky, who could sit back until things really kicked off towards the end there.
At one point, Justine was the top Belgian rider in the race when we thought that Kopecky was dropped, and she was still up there. At one point I was like, holy crap, Kopecky's not even going to be the top Belgian finisher today.
Yeah, and she played it really well as well. Like, to just, it's hard to look at things in the eyes, as did Ruby Rose McGannon at times, and just say, I'm not rolling. I'm not taking a turn. So, and it's hard because I think that's what's so wonderful as well, is how much she trusted in Kopecky, and knowing, okay, if she doesn't come back, I've saved myself, I'm fresh, rather than, oh, we're in the top 4 here, I can get top 4 at the World Champs. And that was what we were really looking at until, what played out behind. But yeah, we'll never know.
No, I think she probably had one of the best races of the day for looking at the riders that featured throughout the race. But we got to talk about Ruby Rose McGannon, because she had the ride of her life yesterday or Saturday. She was in the right place at the right time at every single moment. She never gave up. It was like just incredible to watch. The only mistake that she made, unfortunately, was when she came back onto that group at the end and she tried to ride over the top of them. I was like screaming at the TV because I was like, Ruby, you just had the best race of your entire life and you ruined it in 1 second by this decision. Like, she could have tacked onto the back. But I also think at that point, maybe she didn't back herself in the sprint. Like, maybe at that point she was like, I'm pretty cooked. The only way that I can get a result is if I try to do this move, and it's like maybe not a great move if it doesn't work. If it does work, it's amazing. If it doesn't work, I can't sprint anyway. And I think maybe that was the situation that she was in. But holy cow, what an amazing race from Ruby Rose McGannon.
Just on that one moment, that one attack, it reminded me so much of AVV at Worlds in Wollongong, and it was the same sort of moment, sort of bit over 1 kilometer. It was 1 kilometer go. Caught the group slowed. Unfortunately, though, it was the right sort of thinking, but the group wasn't going slow enough. The change in pace was nowhere near enough when they came up on that group, and so I think we all wish that Rubes would have paused, had a moment to recover, and just reset herself to go again, because the people that we saw who took out that sprint in the top 3, isn't who we would usually have picked. So I think it's so hard when you're just so happy for your race, and then cycling's so annoying like that. It's so easy to pick at things that you could have done better. But I think she didn't have a great Olympics, and she's really struggled in a few races. She's had some really unlucky crashes at the Tour de France Femme, and for her to come here, just tops off her season, so well, Matt.
Yeah, I'm very curious to hear from her about how she sees that last kilometer playing out, because she is, in my experience, one of the most reflective and self-honest, I guess, or self-reflective riders in that she's able to look back on things and assess herself very critically and articulate very well what she did or didn't do right. And she's also just a very smart person. I think if I was giving her the benefit of the doubt, I would say that it's exactly like you said, Abby, that she looked around at the riders there and didn't think that she could do a good result, or couldn't get up in a sprint, knowing how hard she'd worked to fight back and how hard the race had been. And she performed above expectations to be where she was in that final group. And so she probably figured that was her best chance of a win. And we'll never know how she would have gone. But I guess the 5 riders that did beat her are all still good sprinters. And yes, Ruby is fast, but I think, again, as you said before, Tills, it's not only about how fast you are in a race like this, it's also about fatigue, and it's about experience. And, she was up against a lot of experienced riders there who are very good in these situations. So I guess she made that split-second calculation, and she'll learn from that. And who knows, she might have finished 6th anyway, I reckon, but who knows. And it'd be really interesting to hear from her about how she looks back on that.
I think she can still be really, really proud of the race that she rode, and just because of how attritional it was, I wouldn't be surprised if that took the sprint out of her legs for the end. But just to be up there where she was when she was incredible. And it was awesome to have, Australia represented in so many big moves. We also had like Neve Bradbury on the attack multiple times. So like there was some really good moves by the Australian team Saturday. And yeah, I think Ruby can be super proud of how she rode. And I think also we can look at this performance and think about her future as a rider, and what this means for, her classics campaign in the future. Because I think that this means that she could be, one of the riders to watch for a race like Omloop Het Nieuwsblad, for example.
And she's a rider that really thrives on that confidence and believing that she deserves to be there. I remember when she won nationals at the start of the year, and speaking to her in Adelaide, she was saying, yeah, winning nationals is great, but I'm such a small fish in a big pond over in Europe, which is true. But there's also this undercurrent of she doesn't feel like she belongs at that highest level. And she showed yesterday she does. She does belong at the pointy end of the biggest races if she races well. And hopefully she gets more confidence from that, and we see more of it in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, Matt, because I think, she will get so much confidence from that, like a top 10 at such a difficult world championship, where even the Tour de France Femme winner, Cashier, was dropped, and in just such atrocious conditions. I think certainly, as you talk about confidence, she's now not really the sprinter at Jayco Alula. Patacosta is, and so she's sort of taken a step back in that. And then, the one race she has won in Europe, it definitely doesn't have an asterisk on it, but we know that Madura, she celebrated too early for Ruby to sneak that win. And so I think this really solidifies for Rubes that she's meant to be there. And I just hope that she can take that confidence into next year and maybe have a break soon, because it's been such a long year for so many of these riders.
Another rider who can be incredibly proud of how they rode yesterday is Chloe Dygert to finish on the podium. She had such an amazing ride, and she was another rider who was dropped and chased back on and just showed tenacity the whole day to stay in that group. And I think, she's done with track now. The Olympics is wrapped up, and she's signed an extension with Canyon SRAM. So I really hope that we get to see more of her in the classics next year, because I think she can be a really exciting rider in the races next spring if she rides like she did on Saturday, because she was incredible. And she was one of the main reasons, that the group kept kind of coming back together multiple times. When she was dropped, she had key riders on her wheel using her power to get them back into that group. And so like she was amazing.
Yeah, and I also would say, for her to just keep coming back again, Ruby, cold as ice, not taking a turn on a lot of that as well. I just love that. Yeah, I want to turn that into a meme when she shook her head as well when she was in the top 5 there. But I just think also the up next shout out, which it really just fills the podium, which is what you want, is Elisa Longa Borghini. I think she rode the best race that she could, and she was just beaten on the day. And to still get on the podium, I thought for a moment there she could potentially take it, and what a champion that would be. And again, she's had a little bit of a challenging back end to the season, but yeah, I think that whole podium just had such a good day. And I just I know we're being critical, but how good is it to be able to be critical? We had such an exciting race. We had so many riders potentially take the world championship, and it came down, to a small bunch sprint. In the end, it was a dream race for us as fans, just because so much was unfolding. And I think, I think the 3 that took the podium was extremely worthy of that on the day, which is what you want to see.
you go to your results website of choice and see the Kopecky wins a second year in a row as the big favourite. You're like, okay, sure, whatever. That was as it was expected and no big deal. But man, if you hadn't seen the race, you missed a lot. There was so much going on and like absolutely dizzying to keep track of and to summarize afterwards, and so many stand-up performances and groups coming together and breaking apart. And yeah, and yes, Kopecky won in the end, but man, she had to work for that. And then there was just a lot. So I think if you're listening to this and you haven't seen the race, don't watch the highlights. Go back and watch just watch the whole race if you can. It's absolutely worth it. And I just like the idea that we'll look back in a few years and go, yeah, Kopecky won 2 in a row, but that just really, really misses out on how amazing a race this was to watch.
The differences between when she won last year, where she was very much in control the entire race. She never put a foot out of line. And at the end of the day, she was the strongest rider in the race. This year, you probably couldn't say the same thing because she was struggling at multiple points. There were multiple times when us watching were thinking, oh man, this is not Kopecky's day. I texted the group chat that she was human. Oh my God, Kopecky is human. But she won the race because of choices made by other riders, that's bike racing. That's how bike racing works. So I think it just kind of solidifies what an incredible rider she is and how versatile she is as a rider. We know that she's strong, but we also know that she is really smart. And we saw that on Saturday. And I think in terms of the rest of the podium, Chloe's definitely the least experienced rider on that podium by a mile. So for her, it's just a one step up in her career kind of race. And for Elisa Lamborghini, I mean, I fully thought with 5.5K to go that it was her race. When she attacked and the three riders that she was with looked at each other, when Lotte Kopecky and Demi Vollering looked at each other, I was like, holy shit, Elisa Lamborghini is winning worlds. I was like, I'm going to need to sit down. I assumed the fetal position. I was about to lose my mind. And if only that had stuck, because I think Lauren and Gracie said last week that at some point in her career, Elisa Lamborghini needs to wear the rainbow jersey. And it was almost yesterday, but she also rode the perfect race because there were limited opportunities for her to try to sneak away. And that was really the only way that she was going to take this race. If she was going to go to the line with anyone else, it would have to be someone like Rihanna Marcus, who she for sure can out sprint. And she's got a strong sprint, but like we saw in the final sprint, she doesn't have the double kick that a lot of sprinters have, like Kopecky has. She has one acceleration and she can hold that speed, and that's exactly what she did, and that's why she went early in the sprint. That's how she's able to succeed, but she just was up against the wrong riders to win the race on Saturday. So yeah, I think overall we got one of the best races ever, and I think what made it so good was that it was a slow burn. There was so much going on from the beginning and so many different groups. And even when there was that huge break with Neef Fisher Black was part of, at that point, I was like, man, even this could go to the line. Bredewold could win this race. There was just so many things that happened, and it was such a good race. It would take us hours to try to unpack everything that happened throughout the race, which just means that it was a good one.
Yeah, I turned it on with probably just as it started, and I was like, I'll just keep it on in the background as things kind of start to warm up. And I was taking notes from the very start and basically just couldn't look away for the entire time. It was crazy.
And so where do we stand with the under-23? We saw Puck Peterson come in 3 minutes down, celebrating mid-pack across the line. Yeah, keen to get your Matt, I'll start with you on your thoughts on the under-23 title.
Yeah, I think as the Australian commentators, including our very own Gracie Elvin, said on SBS last night, it's just a good thing that we finally see the under-23 women get their own race next year in Rwanda. It's been time for a long time, and it's finally happening next year. And yeah, it was a bit silly, wasn't it, seeing Peterson kind of sit up and celebrate. And nothing against her. Like, of course, you want to celebrate winning a rainbow jersey, but you kind of in the third group back, 13th place, it feels a bit odd. And also just, I know we always see this at Aussie Nationals as well and other races where they're combined. The tactics just get a bit weird and a bit confusing to watch and a bit hard for riders in the race. And, you know, we saw Niedermeyer and Bradbury as well having to mark each other at a couple of points. And yeah, it's all a bit weird. And I think it's only a positive thing that it's going to be its own race next year.
It's so weird that you go on a results website and it doesn't even have like the U23 results on either Pro Cycling Stats or First Cycling, which are probably the two biggest websites. There's no results for a U23 race because it didn't really happen. The first U23 rider across the line like gets, you know, the accolades of being the U23 world champion, but there wasn't actually a race. And so I can't wait for next year. I'm so excited for the first U23 race, and I'm so excited that the UCI didn't implement the rules that they're going to put in place for the men's that they announced just before I think on Friday that the U23 men who are part of a pro team or world tour team, I believe, aren't allowed to race the U23 race. And there was some worry that they were going to also throw the women in there, but they are not. So I think come next year, we're going to have a fantastic U23 race. But man, there was still like at points in the race when I was looking at the group, I was like, okay, who are the U23 riders in here? And like, how does that even factor? And I think you can't pay attention to the race within a race because especially on Saturday, there was so much going on that the U23 race was like basically invisible. It's cool that Puck won. And in her first road worlds ever, she still got a rainbow jersey, which is, you know, really, really impressive. I can't wait for the rest of her, you know, the more she races on the road and the more she's able to accomplish. But it's just a bummer. And it's a bummer for the riders, you know, like that they could have had such a great race yesterday with the U23 riders that we had in play. I imagine if they'd been racing their own race.
Yeah, 100%. One of the riders I want to call out, Fariba Hashimi. She's the Afghanistan rider that placed 7th in the under-23. So they are the Hashimi sisters that fled Afghanistan, sought refuge in Italy. The Italian Cycling Federation sort of took them on board. And, you know, that result in itself to come 7th in the under-23, like that just, to me, implores so much how important just an under-23 race, because that result gets totally lost. You know, she was 7th, but way down, you know, overall. But to potentially to give these young riders the platform, you know, you want to be able to see them. You want to be able to see them actually be able to race for the win. And I think for Puck, who's used to mountain biking, the under-23 jersey holds probably a lot more weight. They have their own races. They get to wear the rainbow jersey in the XCO. But yeah, you know, I'm sure we'll hopefully still see her somewhere on the road, just out training, hopefully. But and I just also hope for the Aussie team. I know that they were in for Neve Bradbury, but I hope they were in for her for the elites. I hope that they weren't riding for an under-23 world champ, because Ruby had said before the race that she was actually one of the earlier sort of sacrificial riders, you know, to ride for Neve. And I just hope they were going for the overall. And in the end, that's why she was in a way so shocked at the finish, because she, in the way that the race played out, being that early rider, got her into the right moves pretty much all day.
I also want to give a quick shout out to Ava Holmgren, who finished high up in the U23s as well and 22nd in the race itself. But she, every single time, you know, we run outside to watch them come by where we're staying, and I was always just like, oh my gosh, she's still there. And she just rode a really impressive race for being such a young rider who doesn't have a ton of road experience. Like, she's obviously really experienced on the mountain bike and cross, but when it comes to road, she's done limited races. And so I was excited to see her doing so well for Canada. But yeah, oh my God, what a good race. Man, we didn't even talk about the 9. I have notes here. I have so many notes. The 9 lives of Rihanna Marcus. She just like kept coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back.
What a diesel.
Yeah, I think her performance was kind of lost in the bizarreness of Dutch tactics overall, really. Like, she was incredible. She was so strong in so many breaks, forging a lot of those breaks as well. Yeah, full credit to her. We've talked about her a lot on the podcast, but she's an exciting rider, and I hope she's still on that upward trajectory.
The other one we had, Ineos Women's have their first and last ever road race. With Pauline was out there somewhere, never saw her. But welcome back to road racing.
I saw her ride past. I think maybe the second time up the steep climb, she got shattered from the back, and I saw her looking miserable. I mean, your first road race back and you get hit with those weather conditions, like I wouldn't want to sign up for it.
You're on a Dutch team.
Just on the weather thing, you touched on it at the start, Abby, but I thought it was worth just calling out what Kasia Niemodova said about the conditions on Instagram afterwards. She said that she's never been so cold on the bike as she was in the race, which I think is saying something from a rider from Poland. And she said, I had nothing in me and just wanted the race to finish. I don't even know what I feel right now, whether I'm disappointed or sad. I'm just still so tired from being cold for that long. I know we touched on it, but yeah, just to highlight how cold and how miserable it was out there. And it rained nonstop. It just looked awful. One of those days where you're just really happy to be watching it on TV rather than out there.
One of the DSs was sending us videos of the course while he was driving. And there were like literal puddles of standing water over your shoes, like over your pedals at points on the course. And so, it was raining the whole day before, the whole day of, and at some points during the circuit, it was not raining. Like where we were, it was kind of like sprinkling. But then you rode like 1 kilometer and it was like torrential downpour. And it was, which is even worse in a way, because then like you get colder when it's not raining and you're soaking wet, but then they'd go right back into the rain. So I really felt for the riders. Like the weather could not have been worse than it was. And now it's Tuesday as you're listening to this, but now is Sunday as we're recording this, and the sun is shining and the fans are out and the men get this beautiful day. But it was a rough day for the women.
Switzerland just looks so good in the sunshine as well, and it's just like such a stunning place, but so bloody miserable when it rains. But also, I think to your point, Matt, around the weather and being so miserable, the hardest part in that is trying to fuel. And I think we just would have seen so many people going flat, just getting totally caught out, struggling to grab bottles, struggling. It's so hard to get nutrition out of your pockets. They had gloves on, they had rain jackets on. Just very, very difficult to fuel. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's where we may have seen Boss just really start to flatline in struggling to get enough fuel in throughout the day.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest parts about racing in the cold is when your hands are frozen and you're trying to get a gel or get a bar in you, and you just it's just miserable. So what a day. Oh, such a good race. I think the weather made it even better. Even if it does suck to be in the race when that's happening.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely epic. Like, it was such a good race. Like, if we're about to get another men's race, which I know you all know by now, but if we're about to get another men's race where the winner wins by like 30 or 20 kilometers, like, we've just been so fortunate this year with the type of how the women's racing has played out and how exciting every race has been, and how it just continues to elevate the entertainment of this sport, which is, really important. And I think in the end, Kopecky has been, if we look at who should be awarded the best rider this year, if you look at Kopecky's resume this year, then it is her. And so she rightfully should be in the rainbow colours, as much as it would have been unbelievable to see ELB in those colours next year. But I just think in the end it played out exactly how it should be.
She's a worthy world champion for sure. And the fact that she's such an all-rounder, where the sport of women's cycling is becoming a little bit more specialized in the type of riders that are targeting certain races. especially with, like if you look at, for example, like Kasha and Demi is a great example. Both of them, have performed well in the classics before, but really this year have become stage race riders. And that has taken away from both of their ability to win a one-day race. And then you have a rider like Kopecky who has only gotten better in the stage races and is still winning one-day races. Like, she didn't skip a beat. And so I think she deserves to be world champion. Absolutely.
And also really good for my fantasy team as well.
I was thinking about that,
come on.
actually. I was thinking about that. Surely I'm still on top.
No,
Surely.
you're second, Tills.
Bloody bothering. Are you
No.
joking? Am I really?
31
Second.
points behind.
Yeah, you're second to Lauren.
Oh
I'm
my.
very close.
But Matt is closing in on me. He is
Am I losing to
only
Lauren?
55 points.
How has she not told
Oh, no.
everyone that? Oh, please. What's left? Demi, I kept saying Demi needs a rest. Demi, no rest for you. You're signing up to Chow Guang next week.
You better go win CMAC Ladies
Oh,
Tour
no.
next
Oh,
week.
no.
I don't know. You've got Charlotte Cool for next week. I think she could
Oh,
maybe
that's
pull out
exciting.
some results at CMAC Ladies Tour.
Wow, okay.
Yeah,
Still to play for.
we'll see.
Very good.
Well, we talked about the women's elite race and we talked a little bit about the junior race, but we have to backtrack a bit to the junior race to mention, I'm sure that everyone's seen the devastating news of Muriel Ferrer, the Swiss junior rider, crashed in the junior race, and unfortunately passed away the next day. The whole situation is still a bit in question. We're not sure how she crashed, and the investigation is ongoing. But the incident itself is devastating, and to have something like that happen in any bike race is heartbreaking, but in a junior race where they have, their whole lives ahead of them, it really casts a shadow over the weekend. And her family had said they wanted the whole worlds to proceed as normal, so like all the races to go on and not be impacted by the incident. But of course, like even Kopecky mentioned it in her post-race interview. It was one of the first things she said after the race. And a lot of riders have given their condolences and mentioned her passing as well. But she's from Zurich or close by, so it's been it's really devastating, and it's something that should never happen. And I think we could try to unpack some of the details around it that we know, but I think overall the number one thing is just how incredibly sad and just unnecessary this is.
Yep, completely agree. Just a horrible, horrible thing for everyone involved, and something that seems to happen all too often in the sport. But I think just to reiterate what you said, Abby, about unpacking it all, I think there's plenty of discourse online already looking at what happened, and I don't think we need to go into all that other than to say that the authorities are doing their jobs to look into it all, and there'll be time to talk about that, and there'll be time to talk about the whole safety aspect and all that. But for now, just our thoughts with Muriel's family and friends and those who raced with and against her. And just a horrible, horrible thing.
Yeah, I think it's hard not to be extremely moved by it, and for it to hit you in a different way when you hear about deaths. And I'm not trying to shift focus, like the focus should absolutely be on her family and friends, but it's just so raw. I think no one ever in their mind would ever think that you're about to start a bike race and that could be the last time you see that person, or and to be 18, to be to have her parents there, to have her family and friends there, and not know what's happened to her. And I think right now is a really good time to celebrate her. And I've heard amazing things about, she was an extremely happy, great energy, extremely talented. She did cyclocross and mountain biking and rode, and a part of the Swiss Federation. But in time, really hoping, particularly for the cycling journalism that you guys are as well, is that we keep talking about what happened here, and to ensure that what happened after that rider was crashed, or however it may be, and speculation doesn't help, as you said, Matt, but we need more. Gino Mater crashed not far from here either, and I just think, oh, it just moves you that that this could happen, that you put your faith in the race. And of course mistakes happen as a rider, but you can only control so much as a rider, and you pay so much money to be involved in this sport, and you just and that is to be safe, to come home from these events. And the fact that an 18-year-old, a child, is not coming home from the world champs, and that is her home, is just very, very difficult. And I think, yeah, it's put a bit of a shadow on the weekend. But I think the event organisers, the family said they wanted it to go ahead. That's why we're able to talk about such a wonderful bike race that happened in the women's and the men's today. But I just hope that, after this, that we can keep talking about it, and hopefully making sure that there's so many things that can be put in place to just try to reduce these types of incidents.
It definitely brings the safety aspect of this sport into the forefront a bit, especially with the snippets that people are getting online about the crash, and also about the follow up to the crash. But I agree. I hope that it's not something we're talking about this weekend and then it kind of gets forgotten in the post worlds like off season come down. And I think that's where the unions, the Cyclist Alliance, and even the CPA can hopefully get involved and get us answers, and work on the that this never happens again in the future. All right, outside the worlds, we've got 3 pieces of news that we'll just bang through super quickly before we wrap up the rest of the episode. Lisa Klein and Little Trek announced this week that they are mutually parting ways. She's severing her contract early due to health reasons and her own reasons. So that was an interesting one. And on the director side, where I mentioned earlier this year that the director transfer market is as hot as the rider transfer market. And we're kind of starting to get some news about that. And SD Works announced their first new DS for 2025, Christian Koss, who is coming over from AG Insurance Sudal to direct for SD Works. Interestingly, the second director to leave AG Insurance Sudal in the last a couple weeks, because Service Kanavan is also leaving the team to work for Shimano Neutral Support next year. So more, director transfers, which I find really, really interesting. And we knew that SD Works was going to need to hire some people in management, with Van de Bregen leaving, and potentially one other director leaving as well. So now we have at least a partial answer that Christian Koss will be filling one of those spots.
Can I just say to all the listeners out there, Abby has to show so much restraint on this podcast. The tea that you could spill, so much more of what's going on, so much more. And you have to show so much restraint. And I think it would be really big of you to be like, I know so much. Look how connected I am, and you don't. And I think that's very admirable. But just so everyone knows, Abby knows a lot more than what she is currently sharing on the record. However, great to see Loretta Hansen, obviously Spratty, re-sign with Little Trek as well. Devastating for Spratty. She had a concussion just out from Worlds and had to pull out with Tiff Cromwell coming in. So and speaking of Brody, she was saying that Spratty was doing it was the 2010 Spratty. She was doing great numbers, looking fantastic. And so just a really challenging back end season for her. So good that she gets another chance to stay at Trek and show what she can do. And then for Loretta, she's just continued to come into her own. So I think 2 really strong, stable re-signings that absolutely need Little Trek for next year.
Yeah, and they both signed 2-year extensions, so we'll get to see them continue racing for Little Trek for at least 2 more years, which is phenomenal. I mean, yeah, like you said, Spratty's had a bit of a rough season this year on multiple fronts, and I just think that she's phenomenal. So really hope that it's a turning point for her. I loved the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift behind the scenes video where she had a broken hand and they were like, be more sad. She's just such a happy person that she couldn't be sad about breaking her hand on the first day of the Tour de France. And Loretta's such a staple for that team, so really happy to see. And they also extended with Ilaria Sanguinetti, who's one of the key lead-out riders for Elisa Balsamo as well. So great things going on, hopefully, for the future. We also had one massive piece of news that is, we know it's happening, but we don't know details yet. The women's Milan San Remo is officially happening in 2025. And that means that Trofeo Fredo Binda is likely going to switch to a week earlier, which is fine because Ronde van Drenthe is canceled. So we actually have an open weekend, which would mean we have Strade Bianche, Trofeo Fredo Binda, and then Milan San Remo. Boom, boom, boom. 3 weekends in a row racing in Italy. I'm sure the riders will be thrilled about that for a little bit of sun and not having to go all the way up to Drenthe to race post Strada, then go back for Trofeo Fredo Binda. Is a bit of a circus to do those 3 races in a row in the past. So yeah, women's Milan San Remo, and we don't know many details about the race so far, only that it is the same day as the men's race. And likely the same finish, but we're not sure about the length or the start. So more news to come.
From what I've heard, it seems like the most likely start point is Genoa up on the coast, which would mean around 150 Ks total, with the same sequence of finishing climbs. So Cipressa into the Poggio down to San Remo. So that's generated some discussion online as well about whether a race of 150 Ks is long enough for the vibe that Milan San Remo has, given that it's all about the length and all about those last climbs after a long, easy day, as it were. So I'm sure there'll be more discussion about that in the months ahead, but just great to see the race get approved. It's been a long time coming, and I look forward to being able to watch that before the men's race at a reasonable hour in Australia rather than staying up till 3 a.m. to watch the end of the men's race.
I hope it stays at 150, because you you say the vibe of the Milan San Remo, Matt. The vibe of Milan San Remo is Milan San Remo interesting yet? And that's like what we want to just so stay away from. Yeah. It's like, and I think it's still hard enough, and you can make that racing hard enough that it's and we also want an exciting group at the end as well. So I hope that they don't try to. There's equal rights and there's equal rights. It's like we don't need the same distance as the men for that. Like the men at the Worlds, what are they doing? 280 or something? Gross. Like wake me up in 4 hours. It's bloody disgusting.
It's unnecessary. Like both the length of Milan San Remo and also the length of Worlds are both just completely unnecessary. And the women do not need a longer Milan San Remo. Just leave them alone. Leave them alone. Let them. Yeah, it's fine. We don't need it. Please. All right. We will wrap this up. Thanks everyone so much for listening, and thank you so much for being on the podcast with me, you guys. I'm gonna skip Obsessions because the men are gonna pass by my window in about 5 kilometers, and I need to skedaddle outside to wave my Latvian flag. So thanks everybody, and we'll be back next week.
All right, thanks.